and then just saying thank you guys for joining us today on this first Zoom of the seventh module about digital resources. This is, as you know, this is kind of a strange model because we start this week and then we have like a break of 1 week and then we come back. But because of the agenda, that was the only way we could do it. So apologies for that. So for today, we have Carolyn Wilson. She's truly an award-winning educator, an author, and consultant. She's working now at the Western University in Canada, and she has been working in media and information literacy and global education for over 30 years now. So she's more than capable to explain you, to go through a little bit of this media literacy and e-learning resources. So thank you, Carolyn, for joining us today. And here we go. This is
Okay.
your time. This is your course.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be able to join you. The technology is wonderful, isn't it, to bring us together and to allow us to do these sorts of things. Really, yeah, thrilled to be here. I was explaining to Albert just before we started that I have a few slides that I'll share with you that really provide a framework and a foundation for our approaches to media literacy in North America and certainly in Canada. So I'll start with a few kind of background slides, and then I put together a list of resources that I can send to you so you can explore it later. A list of resources that I think would be helpful in media and information literacy, really, regardless of your own particular focus or area of interest. So we'll walk through that. As I said, it's put together really for you uh, to share and explore. So we'll spend a little time on it, but not too much either. Um, One other thing I would like to say to begin, speaking of resources and foundations for media literacy and sources of inspiration, I did just want to share with you that just this weekend we learned that a media literacy colleague in the US passed away. Her name is Tessa Joles, and she was the president and the CEO of the Center for Media Literacy in the US. And I'll talk a little bit more about her work as we move through. I was very close to Tessa, so it's been a difficult weekend, but Tessa would have insisted that I show up for this Zoom and that I share these resources with you. This is exactly what she would want to happen on this Monday at noon for me, 12 noon. So I'm really happy to be able to talk about media literacy in the field. It's a wonderful way to celebrate Tessa and to remember her as well. So just before we get started, could I ask those of you who are with us, the students, just to say a quick hello and tell me something about yourselves or your area of interest, what you're doing? Jamal, could I call on you to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, thank you for being here with us and sharing, and I'm so sorry for your loss. My name is Jamal Calendar. I'm from New York slash Barbados, and my area is education and dance. So I've had a long career as a professional dancer, and now in recent years transitioned into an educator, and I'm just very interested in how to bring what we're talking about into the classroom in dance. And that's basically why I'm here. Yeah.
Wow, how interesting. Interesting combination. Thanks,
Mhm.
Jamal. Wonderful. Who would like to go next? Maya, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Thank you. Sorry if, am I pronouncing that correctly?
You are. And in fact, I'm very impressed. Not many people do the first time. Um, but yeah, I am an American that has been teaching abroad for the last 3 years in Taiwan and the last two in Spain. I come more from a background of corporate, but as I've started to get more into a teaching career, I have been fascinated with AI in education and what uh, media literacy specific to AI do we need to focus on especially with how rapidly it's all changing, and just not everyone's keeping up. So I am very interested how we can apply media literacy as a whole, specifically to AI in education, instead of just shutting the doors on it.
Great, great. Thank you for that, Maya. Malik, are you there? Maybe not at the moment. That's okay. And what about Jabir?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. Thanks, Jabir.
Hey there. I'm actually located in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada.
Hmm.
So I'm pretty close to you as
Oh,
well.
hello, neighbor.
Hello. I also do have a little bit of experience teaching overseas. So I did teach in Madrid for about a year, and then I spent the last couple of years teaching in Saudi Arabia, and then making my return back to Canada. Right now, I work as a child and youth worker for the time being, but I do like the idea of communication education, as my bachelor's degree was in communication and media studies. So I always loved the theoretical aspect of studying communications. I've always loved education as well. So when I found this program, it was amazing. It's almost like you intertwine the two fields that I like a lot. So I'm really happy to be here, basically.
Oh, that's wonderful. Gosh, thank you for that. Very interesting background as well. So you must have had an interesting time in the course coming together with these different perspectives and interests. That's really wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope what I share will be interesting for all of you. Since I know kind of your areas of interest, I can point out, a few things that you might want to pursue later. Obviously, not knowing exactly where you were coming from or what your interests are, this will be, sort of a more general presentation, but I'll highlight things that again, individually you might want to explore and pursue further. But let's jump in then and begin with our look at our frameworks for media literacy, which really are foundational and the key building blocks to looking at anything and everything, right? Whether it's a film, an example of AI, excuse me, something on TikTok, an online platform, the building blocks to media literacy really apply to all media, analog and digital. But before we jump into that, I'll just acknowledge my title slide. So you can read what it says: media literacy, reading the world, and recreating the world. And this really comes from the work of Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator and theologian, actually, who really believed in the power of literacy. He was very active in the 70s and really believed that literacy, the competencies related to reading and writing, would unlock the world for his students. And for me, that really applies to what we're talking about when we talk about media literacy today, and the belief that media literacy competencies allow us to read the word on the page, the image on the screen, and to ask critical questions about the information about our world beyond our immediate experience that comes to us through the media. And it's also my belief then, in line with what Paulo Freire believed, that these media literacy competencies will allow us to recreate our worlds as we can actively and critically and creatively participate in them. So that's sort of an important starting point for me. And then in order to be able to do that, I'll share with you a couple of foundational pieces. The first is a set of key concepts for media literacy. And these were developed in the 1980s, excuse me, by the Association for Media Literacy, a founding organization in Ontario, Canada, really the first of its kind in the world, that was developed by teachers for teachers to support their work in media literacy. These key concepts have been translated into numerous languages and have been taken up by organizations around the world. And they really provide a common framework and a language for discussion, a common vocabulary for discussion for teachers and students. You might be interested in knowing that Ontario, Canada, was the first English-speaking jurisdiction in the world to mandate media literacy education. Excuse me. I guess I've been talking too much today. My voice is getting a bit raspy. Ontario was the first English-speaking jurisdiction to mandate media literacy education, and it's part of our curriculum from grade 1 through grade 12. So the key concepts have been really important to us, foundational to our work and to moving media literacy forward. So what are these concepts? You can scan them. I've indicated in various places a couple of examples that you might want to pursue to kind of illustrate what these concepts mean. But you can see the first two relate to the fact that media, all media are constructed. They don't naturally exist. Someone is behind the media text or construct creating it for a particular purpose and for a particular audience. I'll invite you to look at something called The Spaghetti Story. You can find it on YouTube, or The House Hippo, produced by Media Smarts, which are wonderful little examples you can use with students that really clearly illustrate that spaghetti doesn't grow on trees in The Spaghetti Story, and that we don't each own a little house hippo as a household pet. So wonderful little examples that you can explore with students. So the first two really connect to that notion that the media is constructing something and it's a version of reality. It's not reality as it actually exists or as it's being experienced. The next key concept, as you can see, is about codes and conventions, recognizing that each medium operates somewhat differently, and those codes or conventions or the language of that medium, the way in which it operates technically, is often going to shape the meaning or the message that we receive. So it's very closely connected to the idea of Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian communication scholar who coined the phrase, "the medium is the message," and described the global village before we even had computers, believing that one day information would connect us in a kind of village. Anyway, this key concept really relates to some of his ideas. And that is that form and content are closely related, and we need to pay attention to the technology and how that is shaping the message that we receive. I've given you one example there, and you can probably think of your own, but there's a very famous example that we often use here in our part of the world, and that was the first televised US presidential debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. As the story goes, Richard Nixon had the flu, was just recovering, wasn't really feeling particularly strong, decided not to wear any makeup for television, appeared naturally, but was quite sick, apparently appeared quite pale, whereas Kennedy appeared quite fit and young and wore makeup and didn't look pale and was quite prepared for the television lights and cameras. So the common belief is that because of television, because of that form, Kennedy won the debate. People who listened to the debate on radio believed that Nixon won the debate because they were only listening to the arguments and to what he was sharing. However, more people watched the debate on television than listened to it on radio. And experts say that that debate had quite an impact on the election and on Kennedy's election to president. So kind of an interesting thing there. And you can Google that also and watch a clip of that debate and see the differences in appearance, right? And sometimes appearance is everything. And in that instance, it was Kennedy that appeared cool and assured and authoritative, Nixon less so. And as I said, more people watch the debate on television than listen to it on radio. So the impact of the medium there, it's just a great example. Moving along then, you'll see that many of these key concepts are certainly related, right? When we think about constructing reality and the codes and conventions that are used to construct that, we also know that all media convey ideology and value messages. A great example to use with students is popular advertising, right? Just to clearly illustrate the messages and values that are being promoted. I sometimes like to use Super Bowl advertisements with students. The football game in the US, the Super Bowl is a big televised sporting event, one of the biggest media events still in the world. So it's interesting to see what's advertised during those particular time slots that sell for millions of dollars for 30 seconds, and explore the messages and values that are being promoted there. But of course, you can use any. The next point, the media have social and political implications. Certainly, we have seen a lot of this if you think about television, radio, and certainly I use the example of social media and Twitter. Many media watchers, media critics, described the first Trump presidency as a Twitter presidency because Donald Trump used the platform, used social media more than any other president had used it before and was on it really almost constantly, the experts have said. So the social and political implications of that certainly are very clear. But all media, not just social media, obviously have implications, certainly in terms of the ideology and value messages that are conveyed. The other thing we like to stress with students is that media have commercial implications. And by that, we mean that media are businesses that have financial interests. Generally speaking, we know that there are nonprofit, there are alternative sources of media outside the mainstream, but generally speaking, major media companies are businesses interested in profit. And certainly it's interesting to explore Facebook and some of the related issues to Facebook in terms of their audience reach, regulation that is being considered, and just the impact of Facebook as a company on the social media landscape. Facebook that, of course, now is known as Meta. And I don't know if you have access to Netflix or if you have seen the documentary called The Social Dilemma. Have any of you seen that? It's an exploration of Google, Facebook, TikTok, oh gosh, on and on and on. Really interesting documentary where some of the founders of the technology and the developers of the platforms are being interviewed about their business decisions and their interest in capturing and targeting audiences. Great documentary. I can send that to you later, Albert, if you want to post that for the students. And that really leads to the next key concept that's important, that audiences can negotiate meaning. So we know that audiences are targeted, we're targeted, our data is collected, it's packaged, it's sold so that we can be targeted again. We know that happens in terms of media and technology today. But we can also believe that audiences can be active. And that's the power of education, right? That's the power of media literacy. We can be active, we can sharpen our critical thinking, we can develop the competencies needed for accepting certain messages and rejecting others, and critically interrogating the information and values that are conveyed to us. And then finally, the eighth idea here is that it is important to really celebrate and acknowledge that media also gives us great pleasure, right? And entertainment, and is also a great source of joy and connection. And a lot of that has to do with particular forms of media that we might be attracted to because of its aesthetics, the way it's designed, because of the community it brings together. So that's an important point for students as well, that while we want to encourage critical thinking, we also recognize that we're all part of this this world, this media environment, the ecology that exists now. And there are ways that media and technology serve us as well, and certainly ways that we really enjoy our use of it. So, kind of a quick walk through those 8 key concepts. Any questions or comments? I hope I haven't gone too quickly. Any comments or observations?
No.
We're okay, Jamal? Good. Okay, all right, let's carry on. The next example of a framework is this one. So we've got the key concepts. We just had those up. So the 8 key concepts that can be, unpacked and explored with students. What I like about these, and the next framework as well, is that they do help us organize our teaching and our learning about the media, right? They offer us a number of different entry points that we can explore with ourselves and with our students. And certainly the media triangle is another example of that. Again, 3 different entry points that we can use, that we can explore with students, and that really speak to the power of media today. So you'll see, obviously, this is a triangle. This particular framework came from the Scottish Film Council. It was developed by a man by the name of Eddie Dick, who really gifted it to us and invited us to use it in whatever way would be most effective with our students. And related to that, I'll just share a few key questions that we might want to explore with students related to those sides of the triangle. So the first side, if we think of the left one, it's about media texts, but also those media environments or platforms we might turn to. So we might want to engage the students in a kind of evaluation and analysis. What's the story? What's the message or the information being conveyed? And how do I know this? How has it been constructed to deliver this kind of message or this kind of information? And even further, given our concerns about mis and disinformation today and fake news, how do I know this? How can I trust this? What are the sources of this information? How has the message been constructed, right? The next one on the right deals with media audiences. So again, sample questions there. Who's being targeted? How do we know? What are the key characteristics that would indicate a particular target audience is being addressed? How is that audience responding and why? And are there active audiences, right? We have to remember that piece as well. Why might some audiences reject this? Why might they accept it? How might they interpret it and take it up and use it differently? And then finally, the bottom of the triangle, or the third side, explores the production and the use of media and information. How is something made? What are those key technical ingredients? Who owns it? Who controls it? How is it distributed? Who profits from it? And can I create something similar, or can I participate in this media environment in some way? So another framework to consider. Also, I find very effective with students because it is quite straightforward. You've got the 3 sides that you can use as entry points to really any media text. And you can obviously adapt this, as you can with the key concepts, quite effectively for various grade levels, right? And it can remain something fairly basic, and it can also become something quite sophisticated. So I've shared this example as well that really explores in more detail what you might want to look at when you're considering a target audience. The culture, the gender, whether they've been involved with the text before and they have any competence with it, how the text functions socially for them, other issues around production, legal issues, finance, control, distribution, other examples that you might want to explore around messages being conveyed, denotation and connotation in terms of the types of message, the genre of a particular text, values, intertextuality, and so on. So an exploration really can be quite sophisticated as well. And depending on the students you're working with and the text you're working with, you might want to take a deeper dive and explore some of these elements. So that's the media triangle. And finally, this is our last slide for this part of our part of the presentation. I wanted to also emphasize that in exploring the frameworks and exploring media texts and related media issues with students, these are really important and I would say fairly common approaches for looking closely at the media. So we've got our frameworks, but then what do we set up for students so that they can, do a deeper dive into some of this? What kinds of activities will we design? So I wanted to share these pedagogical strategies. I'm going to talk about these just briefly, then we'll go to our resource list. And the resource list that I'll walk you through has resources that are based on the frameworks that I just highlighted and that really explore these strategies for working with students. So very quickly, you can have students analyze media texts, right? They can do a textual analysis of a travel ad, perhaps an ad on Facebook, a media platform. Travel ads I find quite effective with students actually, so I use that as an example because they are so often really clear constructions of realities from other parts of the world. Oh, are we okay? There, I think we're all set. So they're so clearly constructed, right? Beaches that have no one else on them, pristine blue water, beautiful sunny days, just great examples of analyzing a construction. Translation. This doesn't mean a language translation, but it really means examining how the same issue or the same information gets translated or interpreted or changed across different media and different platforms. So also very interesting to explore with students, especially if there's a hot topic, especially if there's been, say, a major issue happening in the news. Well, how is it being covered on social media versus a newspaper or a news organization's website versus a video documentary about the issue? So very interesting to see what gets taken up, how each story or example of coverage is constructed and why. Lots to explore there. A case study is another great kind of assignment where students would be invited to investigate or track a media topic or issue over time. So they really stay with something to see what happens to it in the media, what happens to it on social media, how long something lasts or is trending. That I find students are always very interested to really see what happens to something because sometimes really important stories disappear after a few days, almost like they don't exist anymore, right? The news cycle is so quick, or the popularity of a celebrity or a fad or a trend is very short-lived. So the case study is interesting for students to explore as well. Simulations are great, having students assume roles that exist in media industries where they're put in the position where they have to make decisions. A great example is having them be the editor for a particular news organization or platform. What stories would they prioritize and why? Who's their target audience? Who are their advertisers? Who do they have to please? And so on. And then finally, production. Wherever possible, it's great to have students producing and creating media text to tell their own stories. And certainly now many of our students have access to technology, right, in the palm of their hand. And I always say to my students, typically in classrooms, at least in my part of the world, we are often relying still on, um, paper and a pen and, kind of a written response to things. But wherever possible, have students produce other kinds of assignments, right? We only really have to assign something in writing if we're evaluating writing. If we want to evaluate their knowledge about other issues, their insights into media literacy, into a media text or issue, they can create anything, right? A short video, something online, any kind of statement to demonstrate their learning, right? It doesn't have to be like a pen and paper kind of thing or a keyboard, and they don't have to be writing. They can produce. So great to think about alternatives to more traditional production as well. So that's kind of a walkthrough, very briefly, of the excuse me, of the frameworks and the key concepts. So I apologize for doing so much talking and not really showing you a lot of media, but I'm conscious of the time. So as I said, I tried to highlight a few examples that you could explore on your own. So you can go over the slides, pick up some of those examples and take a look at them and view them at your leisure. So that's sort of an overview of our frameworks and the pedagogical strategies. Now what we'll do is turn our attention to a list of key resources. It's not exhaustive, but I tried to pick out a few that I thought would be reliable, would have some interesting material, certainly related to media literacy and the arts, and media literacy and AI. And the need for expression and production, encouraging that in our students. So these resources certainly really speak to those areas. But before I jump into that, any comments or questions about what we've looked at so far? Oh, yes, Maya, please go ahead.
Not to derail a little bit of this, but when it comes to production in particular, something that I've been noticing with a lot of the students that I work with, right now they're primary, but even some of the high schoolers I work with seem to have an issue with the production piece of this, where it kind of feels like pulling teeth to get engagement in this, even though you might be sharing something that is, topical for what is happening. I've found kids that have no idea what's happening in the news. They have no idea. Even typing is a difficult thing because so many of them grew up with iPads. So I've just been running into some variables I wasn't expecting when it comes to the production piece. Because I've tried debates as well, where I was like, well, let's pick a topic. I'll even let you guys pick the topic. And they don't really have the critical thinking skills to do some of this. So again, I don't know if that's just my location, or, some of it is cultural. I know when I was in Taiwan, there wasn't a whole lot of critical thinking really allowed in their school. It was memorize this, produce exactly this, move on. So I'm just kind of curious. You said especially it's so common or important in Canada. I'm really curious what your experience has been with that.
Well, Maya, I'm generalizing, of course, but I would say likely teachers here are facing similar things. And certainly I did as well. And I would find sometimes it would depend. Sometimes students might really be interested in a topic or issue, and really might take something and run with it. And other times less so. And what I found, for me, I guess as a way of sort of addressing all of this, is to
Mhm.
recognize that you know, act by act or activity by activity, we move forward. We're not
Mhm.
necessarily all at once going to perhaps see examples of this critical thinking or you know, exciting student engagement, but we provide the opportunities. We provide the
Mhm.
time and the space to begin exploring this. I have had students tell me it's the first time anybody ever really asked them to be so involved or to participate or to produce something or engage
Mhm.
in this kind of thinking. Um, but I do believe that media literacy is part of the solution. Of course, it's not the only solution for dealing with, you know, addressing the media literacy concerns of the day. If we want to talk about fake news or disinformation for the moment, just as an
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
So media literacy isn't going to be a magic solution, but it's part of the solution. And I believe in the power of education. But I also believe that kind of act by act, day by day, step by step, we move forward. And there will be days where there probably are going to be some breakthroughs, other
Mhm.
days less so. And sometimes that depends on the context, on the students' backgrounds, on what they've been invited to do. I remember this is ages ago when we still used
Mhm.
video cameras for technology in a classroom,
Yep.
way back when. I'm dating myself or showing my age.
No, I'm
But
with you.
I had a student who came to me to said no to say to me because I gave them this assignment where they could record a video, um, and in that video they had to articulate their opinion about something, create
Mm.
you know, their take, their response to something we'd been discussing. And
Mhm.
a student came to me and said no one had ever asked her for her opinion before. And
Huh.
I don't know if it was the use of the technology. I don't, because I'm, you know, I'm sure she would have been invited to contribute to class discussions before, but there was something
Right.
about that experience of actually documenting her opinion, her perspective, recording it to be shared. She
Mhm.
really felt validated and felt like this was an authentic example of someone being interested in her opinion and her perspective on something. But that was so interesting to me. I couldn't believe it. But then I got thinking,
Yeah.
you know, it probably was a combination of factors that made her feel like, you know, for the first time, she was really in a formal way articulating
Mhm.
her perspective.
Mhm.
Um, but you know, I find it's kind of a day by day. And you know, again, with groups of students, you might have some that are more engaged in issues and in particular issues and not others. Um,
Mhm.
but you know, day by day, we move forward, right?
Mhm.
And I do find over time, many students, most students, I think, do come to appreciate the opportunity to look at media texts and to at least explore some of these issues that are somewhat more related to their own culture, right? And their own
Mhm.
lives. So even
Mhm.
creating space in the classroom for that, they find valuable and interesting, even if they may not, you know, engage perhaps in the levels of critical thinking we might like to see. And maybe that
Mhm.
will come over time, maybe in another year or a couple of years down the road.
Mhm.
Or they could surprise you, you know, and it could happen sooner than not. I hope that's
Right.
helpful.
No, absolutely. It's also encouraging because I obviously want to keep doing this, but sometimes I'm like, is it working?
Right,
So I
right.
appreciate it.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes we might not know whether or not it's really working until students are actually out in their, you know, leading their own lives, and then they think, "Oh, I should pay attention to that, or I should check that." You know, I mean,
Mhm.
it's that transfer we want from the classroom to the real world as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
really where we see it show up. But you know, some of students' hesitancy to participate in what we do in the classroom, I won't just say you, I'll say all of
Mhm.
us, might be, you know, their kind of resistance to the education system, period, right?
Mm. Mhm.
And you know what they've sort of that sometimes I think our education environments and the system creates a bit of resistance in students
Yeah.
just because of the way things are designed and set up.
Mhm.
But I think media literacy at least provides them with some creative opportunities for critical thinking, for an inquiry-based approach that really is quite important, I think.
Mhm. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Jamal?
Yeah, just quickly adding on that, I also had a comment on the production aspect and through the conversation. Thank you, Maya, as well. I find especially when I'm working with dance students on creating, and say I use a prompt of something of this sort of media literacy, and now I want you to produce something, it seems daunting because it's so vast. Like there's no specific scope. So it's like trying to help them channel something very simple. And I always use the onion aspect. Like the onion is just an onion, but there's so many layers within that. So you don't have to think about all the fruits in the world. Just consider, or vegetables, sorry, just consider the onion and let's work through that. And it takes time as well. After a while, they start to find themselves more investigated. I also find the other aspect of the push to get them to try to produce comes from this aspect of they're actually having to be social with people with three-dimensional bodies versus on a screen. When I have them doing activities where they have to interact with each other, that sometimes the first few sessions is a bit of a roadblock a bit, and then after that, they somehow get to understand one another and create this lovely environment. So I just wanted to comment on that as well.
No, that's an important factor, because you're right. Even in terms of social interactions in the classroom, there are other factors now that influence that, right? And the
Yeah.
fact that a lot of their engagement or their communication, as you said, Jamel, might be screen-based.
Yeah.
And now suddenly, I don't know how long your classes are, but here at home, our high school classes are 75 minutes, let's say. So, for 75 minutes, they now have to engage kind of face to face, or, and you're right. It's a good reminder that sometimes things take time. And then also, I love your example of the onion, that we can peel off a layer at a time. We don't have to do it all at once, and we don't have to consider all the vegetables.
Right.
We'll work on this one. And it's a good reminder to us as teachers as well to break things down sort of step by step. And I think some of the resources I'm going to share with you actually have materials for teachers that really do that offer that scaffolding. That's what we call it here, that scaffolding for students, so that they can move forward step by step. And so they're not getting something that's overwhelming all at once, and then trying to cope with it, trying to deal with it. Yeah, really, really great comments. Thank you. You're really thoughtful educators, obviously, with considering all of these questions and challenges. Anybody else at this time? Okay, let me then bring up the resource list. And is it open? No, hold on. I just have to open it on my screen so that here we are. So that you can see it. I had it, but I think it went to sleep. Try now that it's open. Yeah. There we go. So, can you see it? Big white screen working? Okay, great. No, well, not me. Good. Okay. So, great. So, as I said, just put together a list of resources, and I'll kind of share, we'll treat this kind of like an annotated list. I'll go through it and highlight some things for you. Again, keeping in mind, the scaffolding that we need as teachers and our students need as well. And as I said, I've singled out several key resources that I think then will extend to, once you get onto some of these, then there are connections to other groups, other resources as well. So we've obviously just looked at at our frameworks, at our pedagogical strategies, at some of the tenets or the key concepts of what we also refer to as multiliteracies. And we'll jump right ahead. So as I'm going through this, please feel free to look these up as I'm chatting if you want to open something up, if you've got any questions. I won't take the time to do that now. How are we doing time-wise? I'll just walk through them, but please, if you want to pause and open something up as we chat, go right ahead. I'll start with two Canadian resources. Both of these based in Ontario. The first is Media Smarts, a really good organization known as Canada's Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. They have numerous resources for teachers on any number of topics, resources developed by teachers. So a lot of lesson plans, a lot of frameworks, templates you can use on everything from disinformation to cyberbullying to issues around privacy, gender representation in the media, very detailed and really worthwhile. Media Smarts has also engaged in quite a bit of research with young people across Canada that, again, depending on your interests, you might want to check out. The resources are developed in and are available in English and French, and there's also material there for parents that you might want to look at, and resources for every level in classrooms, every grade level. The next one is the Association for Media Literacy. This is really the founding organization for media literacy in Canada. The AML, the association, developed the key concepts that we looked at earlier, and really they're responsible for the success and the foundations for media literacy, not only in Canada, but I would say around the world. Our founder, Barry Duncan, was really quite renowned. He taught in an alternative school. He really could have done anything with his career. Brilliant media literacy teacher, but really had an impact on the development of media literacy in other parts of the world. The AML is a voluntary organization made up of teachers, and their work is for teachers. Really excellent resources there, lessons on any number of topics. They also have quite a unique resource on user agreements, which students might find interesting. End user agreements, so what we agree to in terms of what's going to happen with our data when we click accept, when we visit a website or platform. So they worked with pro bono law students to develop these and a critical look at these agreements that are written for the average citizen. So they do away with the legalese, and they're quite clear and quite effective, really worth looking at. So that's the AML. The Center for Media Literacy, I will highlight also. It's a wonderful organization. This is the organization that Tessa Joels has been the president and the CEO of. The center was inspired a great deal by the Association for Media Literacy in Ontario. Tessa, as I explained earlier, she recently passed away. Right now, the website is not active, but it will be activated again soon as the center reactivates and refocuses again. But it's an excellent resource for teachers. A lot of research there, a lot of material that can be taken directly into the classroom and really worth looking at. Similarly, in the US, NAMLI, the National Association for Media Literacy, also based on Canada's Association for Media Literacy. That was their inspiration. Really valuable for teachers. Resources on every topic from AI to arts education to freedom of expression, a number of really good resources there. They have an annual online conference that used to be face-to-face. They went to a different model after COVID. I should mention also, if I go back up here to Media Smarts for the moment, Media Smarts and the Association for Media Literacy developed a national media literacy week in Canada that is celebrated every October, the last week of October. NAMLI and the Center for Media Literacy, inspired by what was happening in Canada, they have set one up for the US as well. And UNESCO Paris, the United Nations Education Branch, they have adopted it also, and now we have a global media literacy week in countries around the world that last week of October. But NAMLI is worth exploring also. I also really like Project Look Sharp. It's also American, also developed by teachers. So teachers who are in the classroom, who are doing all kinds of work. I will note also that these organizations all have newsletters. Project Look Sharps is great. They always come out with, you know, what they're working on now, what they're teaching, what they're doing. And it's really, really valuable. And again, resources, lesson plans, activities, activities maybe that are an hour long, opportunities to teach full lessons, to develop full units in a course for classrooms. You'll find everything there. I also really like the Media Education Lab. It's based in the US. It's run by Professor Renee Hobbs. They have very interesting webinars, online gatherings and activities, research, opportunities in teacher training. As it says, it is a lab where they're experimenting and exploring a number of issues. Renee has done a lot of work on disinformation and propaganda that is certainly well worth checking out. The next one is Civics of Technology, and it's a newer organization developed, I think, around the time of COVID as well. It's funny how COVID becomes sort of a marker in terms of remembering what happened a few years ago. Civics of Technology is a really interesting group. They are focusing primarily on technology. Not that content isn't important, but they remind us that we need to pay attention to the impact of technology on our work, on our lives, regardless of sometimes the purpose of technology or its subsequent use. What is the impact of that technology itself? How is it shaping our work, our teaching, our learning? Really a great organization, lots of excellent material there. I really like FAIR. It's been around for a long time. FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, a really good progressive media organization. As it says, challenging corporate media bias, spin, and misinformation. A really reputable organization that's worth investigating as well. More as a resource, they have some material that you would take into the classroom, but it's a great resource for teachers to use for ideas and material then to develop lessons and activities around. The Stanford Education Group, again, more recently, has developed resources for critical thinking. As it says, thinking like a historian. They've got excellent lessons that really encourage us to slow down, to think critically about news and information as it's presented in online news organizations, with our online news organizations, and through online platforms. So really worth taking a look at as well. Great opportunities. And Checkology is a news literacy project that, again, I would encourage you to check out. Lots of resources, and I believe the access to this, I believe this is a paid resource. although they always have had some resources that are available for free. But some boards and schools have taken this up, and it's a series of sort of interactive activities and lessons where students become engaged in checkology or checking and paying attention to, you know, a stream of, as it says, misinformation that could confuse, divide. So they're really promoting news literacy through that. Again, a very good resource. But there are others if a paid resource is not something that's appropriate for you at this time. A couple of others. While I'm talking, you should go on to the museum. The first link there is called Today's Front Pages. The museum is fantastic. It's an online resource, all kinds of media literacy material there. And one of their resources that they offer that is terrific is that every day they will showcase the front page of newspapers from around the world, the front page of newspapers or their homepage of websites. Really interesting to have students look at major events and how they're taken up and translated or changed based on whether or not it's a paper in another state or province or in another part of the world. So as a resource for teachers, it's a great activity to explore and have some fun with, where students can see how things are constructed and how they're presented based on an audience and based on geographic location. And then, of course, you can explore with students, why is this the case? You know, why are we seeing these differences? Who's deciding what makes the news? And is there, core news that anybody receives, or is it all different? Is it all constructed based on where you're from and where you're at? This next one, the MIT Sloan School of Management. There are some really good resources there about Twitter, about fake news, really interesting. They've done a lot of work also on deep fakes in videos. So this stands for, MIT stands for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Really interesting work that's happening there. In terms of looking critically at AI, at fake news, at deep fakes, how they're being constructed, and then offering resources and activities and strategies for us to enhance our critical thinking about these topics and issues, and to support students in their critical analysis of what they're seeing every day. The next one, let me just have a look. Yeah, we're almost done. The next one is the Adbusters Media Foundation. I don't know if you've heard of this before, based in Vancouver, Canada. I will say you do have to use some of this with caution. Not all of it might be appropriate for your classroom, but really fun to explore if you use the appropriate examples. Adbusters has become known for their spoof ads. So looking critically at our consumer culture, at the advertising messages that we receive every day on all kinds of platforms through all kinds of media, and they've created a number of spoof ads to critique consumerism and the ideology and values that come to us through advertising. So really, it's an interesting organization. And those spoof ads can be quite fun to take up in the classroom and even have students engage in an exercise where they can create their own. So that's Adbusters, also from Canada. I can't say enough about the National Film Board of Canada. Wonderful resources and materials. For a period of time, the National Film Board had a media literacy department. That department doesn't exist in its entirety, but some of those resources or in isolation, I should say, some of the resources and strategies they developed, now you'll find infused throughout other material, but it's really, really valuable as a source of information for teachers across all subject areas. You have documentaries, you have shorts, you have animations, and very often it's all accessible. Many school boards in Canada belong to the National Film Board, so teachers have access to their archive, but certainly you can request access to particular pieces if there's something you'd like to take up and use, but wonderful material there. Real Canada is also a film organization that's Canadian based, that has lesson plans and materials on films that you might want to explore and use as well. We're getting there, just a few final ones. So now we're going to sort of leave North America a little bit with the exception of one, but wanted to just conclude with a couple of other recommendations. The Council of Europe, you're probably aware of this, maybe you've looked at these in the course. Just as an example, there's some very good work being done by the Council that focuses on digital citizenship education, a lot of really good policy and resources to support that for teachers. So the Council of Europe is worth looking at. Australian Teachers of Media Literacy, worth looking at as well, similar to the Association for Media Literacy in Ontario, Canada. Some really good work being done by teachers for teachers. And I'll jump up to UNESCO, which is, as you know, the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. UNESCO has made media literacy a priority for their work in communication and information, and they've done a great deal to support teachers. There are a number of resources that have been developed that are quite extensive, but UNESCO has established a media literacy unit at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, which indicates, excuse me, the priority that they're giving media literacy. So I encourage you to investigate the material that's available there. But remember that, that you're the experts who are working with your students or who are working in, various situations. So feel free to pick and choose what will work best for you. Some of the UNESCO resources are necessarily very comprehensive and perhaps offer you more than you really need. So obviously trust your own professionalism and your own judgment to pick and use what is most useful. And finally, I'll conclude with the McLuhan Foundation. It's a relatively new foundation in Canada that has been established to really focus on media literacy education and some of the needs that have been identified. And excuse me, take a sip here. Let me start again. The McLuhan Foundation has been established to help address some of the needs that have been identified around the world. I've done quite a bit of consulting work for UNESCO headquarters in Paris, and quite a bit of work for US organizations and Canadian organizations as well. I was the president of the Association for Media Literacy in Ontario, gosh, I think for 15 years or so. And I'm very happy now to be the executive director of the McLuhan Foundation. And we've been established really to act kind of as an international liaison organization, working with groups and organizations from around the world, partnering with UNESCO, and really helping to address some of the needs that have been identified in recent years, specifically supporting teachers and supporting teacher education in the field. We have found that there has been a great deal of effort put into the development of resources and research, which obviously is key, but there is a real need to support teachers in the implementation of resources and in the development of pedagogy and the development of assessment. So that's one of the areas that the McLuhan Foundation is really emphasizing. and that is support for teachers, support for pedagogy, and really the inquiry-based approach in the classroom. Obviously, our name comes from Marshall McLuhan. We're inspired by his work. And his focus also on the need to pay attention to technology as well as content. So that's the other focus for the foundation, recognizing that media content will always be important. We also really want to emphasize the need to pay attention to the ways in which technology, regardless even of intended purpose, is shaping our experiences in life and work and education. So those are a couple of the key areas that the McLuhan Foundation is working on. I'll just say briefly that we have established a global village square for teachers, professionals, researchers, others to come together, share ideas and best practices, and engage in some discussion. We'll soon be launching a series of webinars there, so you can find a link to the Global Village Square on our site. And we will also soon be offering what we hope to be an international kind of summer institute, or an international institute for teachers to come for really specific kind of intensive education and training on implementing media literacy in the classroom. So we're working on that in partnership with the Association for Media Literacy in Ontario, and hope to be involving UNESCO as a partner as well. So that's a little bit about the McLuhan Foundation, because we see ourselves as sort of an umbrella organization working nationally and internationally. I wanted to conclude with that one. But certainly any number of these will offer you a wealth of material, all based on the foundation that we were looking at the beginning, those foundational frameworks and key concepts, based on that, and exploring a number of different approaches or pedagogical strategies for looking at media literacy in the classroom. So that's sort of the I guess, an essential list I've put together. It's, not exhaustive, but I think it gives you a look at a number of different examples to explore depending on your interests. And as I said, once you click on any of these, whether it's Civics of Technology or the McLuhan Foundation or the Association for Media Literacy or Project Look Sharp, that opens up a whole other world, right? So tip of the iceberg here, but I hope it's useful. So I'll stop there for now. We're over the hour. We've got about 15 minutes left, I think, according to the schedule Albert suggested, but of course, I'm sure we can wrap up sooner or later, whatever suits. But I'll just invite any questions or comments. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to open anything up as we've been discussing, or anything you might have questions about.
I can have a question. What struck my interest, I didn't open any of the links, but just hearing you talk about all these organizations and me already thinking about beyond this, I want to actually use what I learned here in practice in what I'm doing and continuing my research, and not implementing it specifically in one school, but seeing how I can actually implement a program or a model of using media literacy in dance. And I think what has struck me is that I don't want to use media as a secondary source. I really want it to be the highlight of what I'm talking about or what we're discussing in dance, and then how to implement that to basically have a different look, a different way of seeing media literacy. And it doesn't necessarily need to be for dancers, it could be for everyone. But I really want to see how I can incorporate that so that we're not using just the same side of the brain of learning things. I think I learned very early on, movement is how I pick up and I learn things very quickly. And I think it'll be interesting to introduce that part more to other people. So I guess for me, I'm curious about going about continuing that.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a really interesting comment. And one thing I took from that, Jamal, is something that's really important to remember. And I think this is what you were getting at when you were talking about media literacy being central to what you're doing, not something in addition to. Um, and I think one of the great things about many of these resources and even the frameworks is that what fundamentally we're talking about is a new way of teaching and learning. Media literacy really shouldn't be an add-on. It really can be the foundational piece, if you will, through which all other learning experiences can occur, whether you're talking about dance or the sciences or um, math, history, I mean,
Right.
whatever discipline you want to talk about. And I think one of the challenges for teachers is that sometimes it's seen as an add-on, like something else I need to do, rather than recognizing it can be part and parcel of what you're already doing. And it's media literacy that can provide that critical framework regardless of the subject matter or topic.
Right.
And I do believe that many of the resources here really celebrate that. I know the Association for Media Literacy in Ontario talks about that quite a bit, that it's a way of thinking about education and how we
Right.
teach and how we learn. It's not necessarily another subject discipline. Although I do know people often argue for that as well, because while media literacy has been moving to center stage, if you will, while it's kind of in a spotlight now because of fake news and disinformation and so on, um, for many years, media literacy kind of existed on the margins. So I know there are some people who believe quite strongly that it should be its own discipline. It needs to be named, identified. It needs its own sort of core for its strength so that it isn't ignored. But I guess I would argue maybe for a bit of both, for sort of that standalone identification, but then, a recognition that we're really talking about inquiry-based learning, and media, and that approach really underpins media literacy. That in turn, um, can underpin everything else, right? So I don't know if you have any follow-up or further
Yeah,
thoughts.
I thought, I just because I was speaking to a former university professor who's retired now, and I was telling her that I was taking this course, and she was super excited, and we got on the subject of, you know, should it be primary or secondary? And she was very strongly saying it's a secondary source, it's a secondary way of engaging with students, and I really pushed back on her a bit, based on, just art my studies here and whatnot. And aside from that, I feel when I speak to people about media literacy and all that it entails, a lot of people think that they are media literate because they have the device, because they're on
Yeah.
the social networks, because they say, well, I'm using it, I'm a product of it, I'm producing there, so I feel I have the literacy, I'm competent in it. But then when we go deeper into conversations, for example, using something like fake news, or like when I say to them, 1/3 of Americans are considered media literate. They don't have the skill sets. This is studies. And they're shocked by this idea because they think that because we all have it and it's in our face, it necessarily means that we know how to utilize it in its totality. And it's like the brain, we're only using such a very finite percentage of this actual world that's continuing to grow even more.
Mhm, mhm. You're right. You're
Yeah.
right. It's a really good point. Just because our students and we ourselves are engaged with the media doesn't mean we're thinking critically about it, how to use it, what it's offering us, and that's why I think the competencies that can be developed through using the frameworks will encourage a bit of a deeper dive, right? and encourage students to start asking some key questions about it. And again, maybe not overnight. I think that kind of inquiry-based approach takes time for students to get used to as well. But I think it's worth it. I think it is worth the investment of that time. And I'll also say as well, I mentioned in Ontario that we have media literacy education in place from grade 1 through grade 12. I do know educators who are introducing media literacy concepts, obviously at an age-appropriate way, for children in kindergarten, just to get them thinking about, um, what just for this example is popping into my head, but why there is that picture on the cereal box, why there's the toy inside, or why there's a code on the box that then they can put into a device that takes them somewhere, just to get them paying it, thinking about in an age appropriate way how they're being targeted as media consumers. And I'm not doing justice to that work. Some of this is written up on the AML website. There's an educator who teaches at the kindergarten level, so works with with children who are 5 years old. Anyway, but I think that's important as well. And another challenge, right, that we're presenting opportunities that are appropriate and do allow sort of access and an entry point for our students so that they can become engaged. And to go back to your example of the onion, that's a good one. Start with a particular layer and work through. And again, it doesn't all have to be done at once. Step by step, day by day, we move forward.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamal. Any other comments or observations from anybody?
I do have just like an experience to share. Sorry for jumping in
No,
quickly.
please. No, please jump in.
So in terms of just media literacy, I noticed so when I was teaching in Saudi Arabia, I noticed with media literacy, like what Jamal said, a lot of them believe that they are media literate, but in reality, to some degree, they sort of lack this I guess maybe it's this understanding of taking or understanding certain messages. And I also do feel to some degree, because when I was over there, they have this idea of like our government's always right and we'll always believe them. And they always have this sense of, for example, when I brought up certain conversations, they're like, well, the Saudi authority says this about it. And I'm like, okay, if they say this about us, but what are other things that you would believe are sort of contrasting to their mindset or what the government would say? And and I do agree with like media literacy does also help broaden the perspective or your mindset of opening or just in engaging different ideas and contrasting views and whatnot. But I do agree like with what Jamal's saying and everything. But how do we sort of underline, and there's a question that I want to like sort of like ask, how do we place media literacy at the foundation of learning? How do we implement that in a sense where students from all ages are growing up with this idea of media literacy from the very beginning? And for me, it's such a broad thing. I just don't know how I would implement it. So I just want to ask how you would do it and the approach that you would take.
Well, I love your question, and and I love and that question, how do we make sure this is foundational for everyone? Isn't that the $20 million question, right? How do we make sure that media literacy is taken up and embraced, around the world? Well, we're working on it, and there are great examples, right? When we look at the resources here, great examples of work that's being done. I can speak to my Ontario experience, and I would say, really most effectively, so I'll maybe be answering your question in fairly broad terms, and then we can become a little bit more specific. But I would say in order um, for opportunities to present themselves for teachers and for those opportunities to in the classroom to have some success, I would say that media literacy efforts really need to happen from the ground up and the top down. That really, for teachers to feel like they have the space, the time, the place to introduce and explore media literacy with students, I think it's important for them to feel like they're not alone, that they are part of a community, that there is a community of practitioners and scholars and policymakers and people who are really interested in this and who will support them. And really, that's why the associations, the one in Ontario, NAMLI in the US, one in Australia, there are similar organizations in Europe. That's really why they sprung up. And that was because they were developed by teachers who wanted to come together to support one another in the classroom. And granted, much of that support now is virtual, but it's still very, very valuable, to have a community of practitioners that you can turn to for inspiration and support. Whether they're, in your school with you or across the city or across the world, right? That being said, I think we also need the support of policymakers. And in Ontario, media literacy was mandated in the late 1980s. And we had that, if you will, we had a perfect storm. We had the association that was established, teachers working in classrooms that were part of this association. And we had a very responsive Ministry of Education, people at the top who were creating policy, creating curriculum documents, designing opportunities to bring media literacy into the formal curriculum in Ontario. And they turned to the association for ideas, for advice, for resources. And so there was a really powerful example of things happening from the bottom up and the top down. And I was a teacher who benefited from that. The Association for Media Literacy started holding conferences and summer institutes and offering courses through the University of Toronto. And so I could really immerse myself in it and feel a lot of support for trying things out and implementing the curriculum that included media literacy in my classroom. And I had a lot of support locally in my school for doing that as well. So I think in order for media literacy to really take hold, we need that top down and bottom up approach. And I think it's happening. Of course, we want to see more of it. We want to see it happening everywhere. But I think because of fake news and disinformation, and because of the accessibility of technology everywhere, I think we are at a bit of a watershed moment, a bit of a turning point where you see organizations, let's even say UNESCO as an example, now establishing this media and information literacy unit at headquarters. So I think things are moving to the next level. Although, as I said, I would argue that practicing teachers in the classrooms still need more support. There are lots of resources available for teachers, lots of material out there, but teachers need that support in terms of implementation. And as I said, that's one of the things that the McLuhan Foundation hopes to address through summer institutes and webinars, supporting teachers who are actually active in the field, who may not yet be connected to, an association, who may not have the support of policy yet. But I do think there are organizations like UNESCO and like our foundation that are really interested in helping address gaps in policy as well. I know there's a real movement in Latin America for policy initiatives for making sure policy is in place so that the teachers then have an opportunity, then the door is open for media literacy work in schools. So I don't know if that answers your question, but a little bit of the reality, I think, and some optimism, I think. In spite of everything we're facing, I think it has sort of moved media literacy to center stage. And I think we now are in a bit of a spotlight that that I think will help to galvanize things and move us forward.
Thank you so much, Carolyn.
You're welcome. Anything
Thank
else?
you. Yeah, I just want to say that that was great and very interactive. So thank you, all of you, for that. And I don't know, maybe if Jamal or Javier or Lorena had some final thoughts, anything you'd like to share before we end this session today. But thank you, Carolyn, because it was really, really interesting.
Well, thank you
And
very much. I'm sorry not to have been showing more media literacy examples as we went through, or examples from the media.
mhm,
But please explore the things I shared. I realized it was a bit of talking, but I kind of had to make a choice on how to use the time. So wanted to start with this and thought then you could explore the examples of the resources or
mhm.
the media texts on your own at your leisure. So I hope it was useful.
No, sure. Yeah, it was perfect. And thank you also for this final optimism. Sometimes we need it in this course.
Great,
Yeah, with
great.
all the information related to IA and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we lack of optimism sometimes. So thank you for that.
And I should say, I didn't really specify that in the resources, but UNESCO has resources that speak to AI. The Association for Media Literacy does, Project Look Sharp. I talked about MIT. You'll find that those are being developed. And many of them will be quite foundational because, of course, AI is changing, right, every few
Mhm.
days. But there are some wonderful resources, again, to encourage critical thinking about that, not only for our students, but for ourselves as we move forward. So I should just mention that also.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. So, okay, guys, anything you'd like to share before we end today? If
Sorry,
not, yeah, yeah, go
I
ahead. Yeah.
apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off. Is it okay if you could post the links onto the forum? Dr. Albert, just what Caroline showed, like for example, UNESCO, the McQueen Foundation. If you could share it onto like the module on the
Sure. I think we can do better. If Carolyn, that's okay with
Yes.
you, you can share with us this presentation so we can upload it to the virtual
Yes,
campus.
definitely, definitely. Otherwise, it's not very useful to you. So definitely, I'll share that. So again, you can, yeah, turn your attention to it when it suits and explore things in a little more detail. Happy to do
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so if you don't want to say anything else, I think we're going to leave it here.
that.
So
Okay.
thank you again, Carolyn, for your time. Thank you for all the people who joined us today and for your participation. And if you need anything, you can always reach us by mail or by WhatsApp. So thank you guys and enjoy the rest of your day.
And thanks very much for the invitation. I enjoyed hearing from you and hearing your ideas and congratulations. Your ideas and your insights are really, really valuable. Well done. And good luck on the rest of the course.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.